Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hello, Renegade Thinkers. I'm recording this episode from home, and I've already had 4 takes on the intro. Clearly, I am flustered. This is the situation that most of your employees are feeling, and maybe you are too. We're working from home, and we're trying to deal with it. There's lots of issues that we as leaders of our departments or organizations need to be thinking about that we didn't have to think about just a couple of weeks ago. To help me sort of think this through is Khalid El Khatib, who is the CMO of Stack Overflow, baby. Got it right this time. Stack Overflow is a company that it's a community and a company that has been focused on the developer market for a long time, started as a blog. And what's interesting about this market is developers were on the forefront of working at home early and working remotely early. And so I thought it'd be interesting if Khalid and I talked about that subject. So Khalid, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
That was hard. Just getting through the intro was hard. I imagine there's some challenges because you don't always work from home, right?
I don't. So Stack Overflow is headquartered in New York. We have about 260 employees all over the world, but I work in New York with most of the rest of the senior leadership team. So while I work from home, if there's a doctor's appointment that I have or something in my apartment needs to be fixed, I'll stick home, but I spend most of my time in the office. So this has been an adjustment for me as well.
Yeah, and I imagine just like I had to set up a whole new rig at home to make it work and I had to wait until the end of the day when it was actually quiet and my wife was taking the dog out for a walk because otherwise he would want to join the show. I'm imagining that you've had to make some adjustments as well. Yeah.
For sure, I have. For me, it's, I think everyone is different and we're taking the situation and we're all in one day at a time. But for me, it's less about the physical space. A lot of the challenges for me are I guess, more psychological. So, as you know, working in marketing and communications, you tend to have this always on mentality. And so what I've struggled with, and I think a lot of people are struggling with as well, is waking up, starting the day, and then closing the computer at the end of the day when your computer is, a matter of yards or feet away from you at all times.
That's such a good point, and that is certainly one of the areas that I want to focus on in this episode, because I think this is a subject that both you as a CMO and the CMOs who are listening and your employees are going to be feeling it's literally you have to create a new routine, right? We used to get up, we got ready, we brushed our teeth, had our breakfast or not, and then we had our commute and we got to the office and then the workday began. Now, you're absolutely right. The workday begins the second you wake up. And so what I've been reading a lot is and I'm sure that some of the developers you've worked to figure this out a long time ago, is you need a new routine.
You do. I think that's true. I think you definitely need a new routine because your reality has changed. But I think that we shouldn't sacrifice or give up our old routine entirely. And that's advice that I hear from all of my colleagues who have been remote for months or for years. And so, I think that's good news for you. It means that everyone should keep listening to their favorite podcasts, even though they're not taking the subway or driving or running to work. It means that you should get dressed every morning and brush your teeth. You shouldn't necessarily take all of your calls in sweatpants, as tempting as that might be. And I think that, the one of the reasons that I'm on the podcast with you today and where I'm getting a lot of this advice is that Stack Overflow has been remote first for a long time. So our company, before we went fully remote on March 9th, was 40% remote already. And so when we made the decision as a leadership team to go remote, one of the very first things that happened is all of our remote colleagues invited us into a Slack channel, Office Remote is what it's called. And then they started peppering us with best practices and tips almost immediately. And then someone on our people team consolidated all into a doc. And so we got smart, I think, faster than most people were able to.
Wow. Well, a couple of things come to mind. One, would you be willing to share that doc with the audience? I'd love to link to it from our show notes if you can make that public.
For sure. So we actually we're one step ahead of you.
Of course
Which
you are.
won't surprise you because I'm a marketer and you're a marketer. So we recognizing that is opportunity to get some eyeballs on our blog, but also that we want to lead by example. We recognize that people here are really struggling, and if there's an opportunity to help them and to lend expertise, we want to do that. So we turn that document into a blog that not only shares tips and best practices on working from home, but also shares some of the tools that we use to stay connected, since we have employees all over the world.
So I want to talk about some of the sort of the basic tips before we get into the tools. And I know, for example, first couple of days I was working down on the couch, and that gets old fast. And so I went upstairs. We happen to have a good chair, that a work chair that is supports my back. And I'm curious, what were some of the tips that the folks that from your team that have been doing this for a while that surprised you or that you hadn't thought about?
Yeah, sure, of course. I think one thing that's important to recognize is these are highly unusual circumstances. So I think if you accept a job offer somewhere and it's fully remote, you would approach that situation differently than you would the situation we're in today. So it's not feasible or realistic to order a new chair from Steelcase or, an incredible standing desk that will be shipped to you in a matter of days. I think the reality we're all grappling with is, to some extent, we have to make do with what we have. The one thing that I think we can all practice that I've heard from my colleagues, and you've been reading a lot over the past few days, is that working out of your bed or on your couch is not really a best practice. It's going to negatively affect your sleeping habits, and it's probably going to hurt your back. So having a space as far away from your sort of social or relaxing space as possible is certainly important.
So, a lot of things like that are coming to the fore. And I encourage all of you, if you haven't already, do a quick hashtag WFH search. That's work from home, because all sorts of people are coming up with innovative standing desks. I saw one woman who, of course, had stacked the toilet paper on the sink in her bathroom, and that was her standing desk. And I saw others that had taken giant cases of water, because everybody's hoarding everything, so they're taking advantage of the stuff they're hoarding and maybe putting it on a washing machine. So there's some clever solutions going on. And what I think is another part of this is, since this is a weird moment and there's an opportunity or a risk of everybody feeling connected, sharing those stories internally, I think, is really, really important. I'm wondering if you all are doing that now, if you're having more video conferences and you're all sort of sharing, oh, look, my dog or kid joined us in the meeting.
For sure. So, one of our longstanding principles of being such a remote company for so long is that if one person is remote on a call, then everyone's remote. So if we have a meeting of 10 people on the marketing team, for example, and 8 of them are in the office, but one is in Denver and one is in St. Louis, we'll still do that meeting over Google Hangout. So that's a best practice that's serving us well today. But to your point, socialization is really important. And because we've been such a remote company for so long, we've done this pretty well for a long time as well. So on Slack,
that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that, because we actually have that situation. We have a number of employees who've been working remote, say 1 day a week, and we have one employee who works remotely, like in a different country. And so, but we hadn't really considered the notion that you make that one individual feel isolated if everybody is in a conference room, right, with one camera, and then there's this one individual who's who knows where. So that's a really good observation.
And it's not just isolation. Most conference rooms, unless you work for an incredibly well-designed, state-of-the-art workspace, and most of us don't necessarily. I always joke that tech offices have the worst AV in conference rooms. So beyond the isolation, it just sucks being on the end, being the one or two second remote person on a call that has to keep saying, what did they say? Or trying to catch up over Slack or get notes after the call, because it's so hard to follow along.
So I'm curious if this is something that we're going to see very quickly, but with everybody working at home, you would think that there's going to be a great strain on internet connections. And again, I suspect you're all ahead of the game in that, I heard somebody the other day said, I can't do work at home. I don't even have internet. I always work at somebody's office. So that there must be some logistical challenges that bigger companies are facing with just having basic connections.
For sure. I mean, I think it's two ends of the spectrum. And one is the sort of cultural shift. I have a friend who's married to an architect, and they were saying that they were hearing their husband on a conference call for what seemed like the very first time, because architects certainly aren't used to working from home, and this is all very new to them. I think on the other end of the spectrum, to your point, there are some real technological challenges here. So in addition to writing the blog post on working remote, we wrote one on how we built our VPN and some best practices that companies and CTOs and CIOs should think through as they potentially scale their VPN and very quickly. Certainly not my area of expertise, but again, in service of all of the people who need help right now, we felt it was important to share those. So I'm happy to send you that link to share with your readers as well.
That's awesome. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and it's a perfect transition to talk about tools and technology to support this process. So stay with us.
Hey, it's Drew, and I wanted to have a quick conversation about turning lemons into lemonade. Here are the lemons: skiing, Park City, January 11th, third day, last run, going fast. Light was bad, a lot of snow on the ground. 50 yards from the bottom, I crashed and burned. Literally tumbling down the mountain, did a 3-point landing with my head and 2 thumbs. Broke the right thumb, sprained the left thumb, finished up surgery 5 days later, and now I have a little extra time on my hands. What do? I finish a special report that I've been dying to finish for a long time, which is a way for me to get to my next book. It's a preview of the book. You can find it on renegade.com. On the very beginning of the homepage at the top, there's a banner that says B2B Special Report. I would love it if you took a look at this and let me know what you thought. I think you're going to find a lot of value in it.
Okay, we're back, and we're talking about something that is probably happening to you right now, which is you're working from home, #WFH. Khalid had just mentioned VPN. For those of you who haven't heard that term, virtual private network is a way of having secure communications when employees are all working remotely. And again, if you were a company that had a strong, a sizable workforce that was working remotely already, you already had VPNs. But for a lot of companies, that's a new term. What do you think?
I think that
they're screwed, I think.
No, I think that there are a lot of new terms, and we're going to have to quickly acclimate to this new environment because it seems like it's going to be our new reality for a while. I think that VPNs are a real challenge. They're a real challenge for technology leaders, but one that folks will be able to figure out. I think that some of the biggest challenges are going to be cascading a new tool or technology to an entire organization. So, many of us, especially in the marketing world, take for granted a chat tool like Microsoft Teams or Slack. It's pretty intuitive to us, especially since many of us have been highly digital for a long time. But there are all sorts of industries where that is groundbreaking. And communicating over text, just one small example of it, for example, is in the same way that a text from a friend can be misread. If an organization is moving to Slack or GChat or Microsoft Teams or what have you, tone can be mistaken all of the time. That's just an enormous cultural adjustment that folks are going to have to be able to get used to.
And are you finding, because definitely our team is all on Slack and we've been using Zoom a lot more, and I'm finding that because we're all so used to seeing each other in the office, and even if we go to work and we put our heads down and we work really hard and we don't even have too many conversations during the day, just the fact that we were in the same room together sort of gave us a sense of, oh, we're connected, and suddenly we're not. And so, and I've got a small team, but when we did the Hollywood Squares meeting on Monday morning, everybody got a big kick out of it. And I realized that we need to do this like every other day. And the video was important because we needed to see each other. And I'm wondering if you have found that on your end.
100%. So socialization is super important. Like you said, we're all social beings, and these are unprecedented times. And so the likelihood is that we go a little bit stir crazy if we don't keep connected to folks. And so we do it sort of two ways. One, we don't just use Slack to collaborate on work. We have channels for our pets. We have channels for our babies. We have channels for workout tips, film and TV, and coffee developers. What you see on TV and movies isn't always true. It is true that developers love coffee. So there's a highly active Slack channel where people talk about the espresso they made that morning, or how many red eyes they'd had over the course of the day. So folks stay connected there. And then another thing that we do is we leverage video conferencing all the time. So we use Google Hangouts and we use Zoom for larger meetings. And in addition to doing all of our meetings over Zoom and Google Hangouts, we occasionally will have lunch over Zoom. So someone will pop into our big Slack channel and drop in a Zoom link, and then anyone who wants to have their lunch over Zoom can. And then we on Friday, and I imagine this will continue to happen because it was pretty successful, did a virtual happy hour at 4 or 5 p.m. And a number of people joined. And, I think that it helped not only keep them sane, but it was comforting and reassuring just to stay connected to folks.
I love both the lunch over Zoom and the virtual happy hour. I will be borrowing that immediately for the Renegade team. I think a nice addition to it. Now, obviously, if you have hundreds of employees, it gets more challenging. But let's just start with the marketing team in your department. Do a lunch over Zoom, but order food for everybody and have it delivered to their houses or apartments. Sure. That's a nice way of saying, hey, we're doing this. A little more challenging when it comes to a virtual happy hour. You probably heard the term quarantini.
I have.
Yeah. And I think that there's some, that's certainly a meme opportunity and a way of bringing folks together. So love that. But I think that's part of this is also just thinking about now as a leader of a team, if not an entire organization, what are the things that you can do to bring back normalization in a crazy time? Mm-hmm. And if we're used to having lunch or together or having a happy hour, which a lot of companies are, then find a way to do those virtually. And we'll see if the novelty wears off, but certainly in the first, God forbid, month or two, this will add a lot of value. And I think, again, as the leader, and this is what this episode is really about, is as a leader of your marketing team and frankly of the organization, it's your job to think about how employees are feeling about the business right now and how they're feeling about the world right now. And so you have to stay connected to your team and you have to stay connected to the organization. I'm just curious, I want to go back to Google Hangouts versus why not use Zoom for everything? I'm just curious.
It's a licensing issue for us.
I see.
So we use Zoom for bigger meetings.
Got it. Okay. And because Hangouts is free?
Well, we use G Suite for all of our.
Got it.
For
so
everything.
So it's just plugged in. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Are there any other tools that you all are using, or because you've been remote for so long from a collaboration standpoint, that folks may not have thought about before, but suddenly because they could do internal brainstormings and they were used to collaborating face to face?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be doing my job as the marketing leader of Stack Overflow if I didn't tell folks a little bit about Stack Overflow for Teams, which is a collaboration tool that we use at our company. So Stack Overflow, as many people know, but not necessarily all marketers, is the 35th most popular website in the world, where developers and other technologists ask Q&A relative to programming challenges. And what we've done is we've taken that Q&A platform, which has been very successful since 2008, and we've given folks a private instance of that they can use as their internal knowledge base. And it replaces wikis, and we realize and recognize that tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams, which are incredible for real-time conversation, aren't the best place to store knowledge. They're difficult to search. When an employee leaves, that knowledge might disappear, and there is certainly a lot of redundancy. And so one thing that we do to memorialize knowledge and to put processes in place is we use Stack Overflow for teams. And so a great example of that, the way the marketing team is using it, it's not just for developers, is when we have new messaging, for example, or a new resource library for a salesperson, we'll ask a question on Stack Overflow for teams, we'll answer it ourselves, and then we'll cascade all of that information to sales teams and update it as appropriate. So that's one tool that we use. Like I said, it's in my best interest.
No, totally appropriate. And if it makes sense, and it immediately made me think of that, which is great. One is that you can bring your employees together over this, and two is that you're also sort of drinking your own champagne at the moment, so you guys get used to using what your customers are doing. So it certainly makes a lot of sense for you all to do it. There's a larger thing here, which is probably a good transition, which is we need to be thinking about, once we're done thinking about our family and our personal health and the health and the well-being of our employees. Obviously, it's about our customers. And I'm wondering if by having a large community with this kind of Q&A thing, if you guys feel like you're really on the pulse of what your developers are thinking about at this second about this issue, about the environment that we're facing right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think like many questions in this unprecedented time we're in, the answer is a little bit of hurry up and wait. So I think like everyone else, we're assessing all of the information that we have available to us in real time. And so one thing that we have at our disposal is a massively trafficked website. And so we're assessing traffic patterns over time as people work from home, in the same way that you're trying to figure out how people now listen to podcasts and when. And we're monitoring all of the tags that people are reviewing. So has there been a massive spike in people searching for how to troubleshoot VPN challenges? Are people trying to figure out what to do with managed clouds now? It's very early days. We have less than a week of data, but one thing that we're trying to figure out, and then we'll hopefully be sharing more around, is what people care about right now. What are their biggest challenges, and how can we and the rest of the tech community help them? And I'll share this link with you afterwards, but I think that these are tough, unprecedented times, but the tech community has really stepped up, and there are all sorts of initiatives and tech companies who are making resources available to folks for free. And so one that comes to mind is Open for Business, which is an initiative that is consolidated Atlassian, Box, Zoom, Google, and a number of other companies who are extending their free trials, waiving fees and things of that nature to support people who might be going remote for the first time or who are facing unique challenges right now.
Yeah, I noticed it's such a great point, and I expected to see a lot more of that. It's just hard to gather it in one place. I'm glad you have it. I noticed that Zoom had offered something for K through 12, or sort of unlimited access, and initially was extending their sort of limitations that they had for the folks in China. But I feel like that you're right, that the tech community has to be very careful here to not look at this as a profiteer or too optimistic, opportunistic. This is an opportunity to step up and really make a difference. And I love hearing about that Open for Business. We'll definitely link to that from the show notes as well.
Yeah, I think that you make an excellent point, and it's one thing that we talked about very early on as a marketing team. So I took a subgroup of the marketing team to start working on, how do we create content in this era? As you can imagine, and I think as many CEOs are grappling with right now, an enormous amount of our demand generation focus was on live events and conferences. And so we had to figure out how to shift that to virtual, what we should be talking about on virtual events, and how we can best help people and really not take the wrong approach here, both in the content we create and how we position it. And so very early on, we created a Google Drive folder that the full marketing team had access to. And we just started dropping in examples of how other people are navigating these strange and uncertain times, and examples of people who are doing it really well, and companies who have really left a bad taste in our mouth in some of their outreach and some of their ads.
Yeah, I've been getting some of the emails that I'm getting are, not only do they make me want to gag, it's sort of immediately put them on the profiteering list and, shame, but they just don't seem to know better. And clearly they're not purpose-driven organizations. Anyway, not going to preach, at least at this second. I'm going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about productivity. And then I also want to talk about this, the virtual events and how you guys are looking about reallocating event dollars. So we'll be right back. Stay with us.
I'm back. I'm not going to talk about skiing, but I do want to talk about the special report that you will find on renegade.com. There is so much meat in this, in the 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy in 2020, that there are probably some folks out there that think I'm crazy to put that out there in front of a firewall. But I'm really hoping to get feedback from some of you all on the report, perhaps what's missing, because again, the book is going to be developed against this outline, but fleshing it out. There might be some guests that could help fill in some of the areas. You may disagree with some of the things. I'm really, really interested in your opinion on this piece, and your engagement with it will really help make the book that much stronger. So you'll find it on renegade.com. Very top, there's a banner that says 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy. Take a look.
Okay, we're back. And Khalid, you just mentioned how your team is using Google Share Drive to share ideas on what to do since we can't meet face-to-face. And that was such a big part of a lot of B2B businesses' business, right? It was either being at conferences, exhibiting at conferences, working at conferences, learning at conferences. I mean, that whole world. Maybe, through 2020, it's hard to project completely, but certainly I know people are, the soonest I've seen anything replanned is for September, and that's iffy, right? What are some of the things that you guys are thinking about in terms of how do you replace events?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. And again, we're just over a week into this. And so I think that we're still figuring it out. We're having discussions all of the time. I was supposed to be in San Jose for a conference last week, and I had 2 conferences in Vegas next week or the week after. All of those are gone. And so pretty intuitively, we're definitely focused on virtual events. We're focused on hosting webinars. We're also really focused on AMAs. And AMAs that we wouldn't have had historically. So, most of the time, webinars or virtual events that we've hosted and most marketers have hosted have been a co-presentation with a customer, profiling and integration, all sorts of things of that nature. And just given how important it is to highlight subject matter expertise right now, things we're considering are along the lines of how to lead an engineering team remotely, how to scale your VPN, for example, what our toolkit looks like for a product designer who's working remotely and how you can do that. So we're trying to position content that's really helpful and coming from a place of knowledge. And then another thing that we're doing is we're experimenting, like all marketers do all of the time and have done for a long time. But I think that in the same way my team is experimenting, event organizers and conference planners around the world are doing the same thing. So some of the conferences that we were sponsoring and supposed to be at are now doing virtual expo halls. Talks that we were planning to give are now being recorded and cascaded through to conference attendees who were supposed to be in person. None of those have actually happened yet, so we don't necessarily know what they're going to look like or how well they're going to work. But I think that we're of course shifting some of our budget to a digital focus, but we are continuing to experiment with conference partners.
Yeah, I'm of mixed minds. I mean, people have been wanting to do virtual conferences and expos for years. I mean, and at least as far as I can tell, there's no great solution. And, I think about the enthusiasm that I have for conferences and why. And it's all about the meeting the people and sharing the people and, the sidebar conversations and the other things that you have. So it'll be really interesting to see what some of these tools and organizers come up with to try to replicate that or not. But still, I mean, you think about it, you leave the office, once you've left the office, you committed. If I'm at home and I know that Adobe has an event coming up very soon, and I'm thinking, am I going to watch this streaming conference? Why would I do that? Or why would I do it during the normal business day? Maybe I'll make a note to watch it some other time, but there's no urgency.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I would say two things. One, we're all going to start changing how we behave, how we work, and how we live. And there is a reality in which we get very used to virtual events and conferences, and it becomes the new normal. I think also, a while back, I worked for TED, the TED Conferences Agency of Record, and they had a pretty successful virtual conference model. Well, of course, a lot of people went to Vancouver and watched the conference live. Because TED embargoed all of their talks for a long time, there was a sense of urgency, and there were a number of people around the world who did tune in live. And I think the first sort of conferences and conference organizers who can pull that off will potentially see some success. I think maybe one of the first major ones who is tackling the challenge is Collision. The Collision conference is happening from home. I think they're calling it Collision from Home this summer. Historically, it's been in Toronto, and that's no longer going to be the case. So I guess we'll just wait and see. But
yeah, and I think it's a great point about TED, and I think that it speaks to a brand that was well known as really high quality a presenting organization. So they already had credibility in the marketplace. It's also the length. That you can watch them in bite-sized chunks, right? The sort of 20-minute chunks, and just remarkably, as you're talking, I'm thinking of the Bill Gates TED Talk that has been going around from 2014 or 15. Yeah, where he was talking about anticipating and planning ahead for an epidemic, and everything that he talked about didn't happen but could have happened. And it's just it's a damn shame, because this isn't a surprise to science-oriented people. Where we are today is not a surprise, and we'll link to that episode, that TED Talk from Bill Gates. If you haven't seen it, you'll just gulp.
Yeah, I was in the audience for that, and it's actually been a crippling fear of mine since I saw it in 2015. So I wish I had taken it more seriously, I suppose.
Yeah, and just it's phenomenally. It's such a rational and science-based, and it totally makes sense. And you watch that, and okay. So why do we ignore that? Anyway, not much we can do about that now, other than take a break and wash your hands. No, we're not going to do that. All right. So I want to end on a sort of somewhat upbeat note, circle back to some of the things that we were talking about from a productivity standpoint, both from a CMO standpoint, things that you do or some of your developers do that we haven't talked about. I noticed, for example, that Forrester has a new Peloton group so employees can work out together and stay healthy and motivated. Thought that was a great idea. Yeah. And I'm curious if there are any other things that you had on your list that didn't make it into the show so far.
Sure. Yeah, I think someone shared this great graphic with us, and I can send you the link, but it's the TLDR of it is that when you work from home, you're basically a plant, drink water, get sunlight. And that's been hard for me, just continuing to fill up my water, because at the tech office at which I work, we have a fully stocked fridge. And so now I just have to keep going to the sink. I think the get sunlight point is important. We're grappling with a reality in which most of us are confined to our homes, but that doesn't mean that you can't do a walk, or what could have been a walking meeting is now a walking conference call. And then I think my biggest tip, and one that I've been talking about with my team since all of this happened, is that we have to take care of ourselves and of each other. So we have to constantly check in on both our physical and our mental health. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that everyone is processing this differently. So some of us have children, some of us don't. Those children are most likely home, a new challenge for many, many parents as they work with kids around them. Some of us have older parents that are at incredibly high risk. That can be an enormous stressor. And so beyond sort of checking in with folks over time, one thing that I implored my team to do is to leverage tools like scheduled send on Google. Maybe you have an amended work schedule, so you're starting at noon and working to 8 now because of the childcare situation. But be mindful of the fact that your other colleagues might be trying to sign off at 5 or at 6, and schedule that email to go out the next morning. Leverage statuses on Slack. So if you need to take a full hour for lunch for self-care, certainly do that. Let people know not to bother you during that time. Turn on Do Not Disturb. So I think that's one of the most important tips, even if it seems pretty intuitive.
I love it. I think it's great. And having spent the whole day inside, I think we're going to wrap up the show. And Khalid, thank you so much for spending time with us. I know it's a crisis moment for all of us, and sharing the insights that you've been able to gather as a result of having a huge remote workforce has, I think, really been helpful and also inspiring. I love the fact that yes, we are plants, and we better get some sunlight. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and take care.
Yes, you too, and to all the listeners, I'm so grateful that you're spending the time with us as always. I hope you found some inspiration here. If you have some thoughts on how you guys are coming up with motivating your and innovating, exciting your employee base, do let me know. You know how to get a hold of me. In fact, you can hit me up on Slack or text me at 917-679-8852. I'd love to hear your ideas. This is a moment to share and make yourself available. So please, I'm here. Would love to hear how you're dealing with the challenges that we're all facing. And until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.